Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I am so excited to be here today with Dorie Clark, who is the author of 4 best-selling books, including her most recent, The Long Game, How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. Dorie, welcome to the show.
Will, I'm so glad to be talking with you. Thanks for having me.
Boy, this book so closely aligns with my philosophy. I love the way you've laid this out and made such a strong case for long-term thinking. I want to just jump right into one of the sections. I really like the section on thinking in waves. You have this framework: learn, create, connect, and reap. Sort of 4 waves. Talk to me about that framework.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the challenges that I kept hearing sometimes from colleagues or from coaching clients is that at a certain point, people just would often say things like, "Oh, I feel like I'm stuck," or "I feel like I'm in a rut." I'm working so hard, but I'm not getting the results that I want, or doesn't seem like I'm making progress. And so I would dig into that a little bit more. And what I discovered was that very often what seemed to be happening was that they were not wrong. They were working really hard. They were kind of tiring themselves out, doing things that were good things. They weren't watching cat videos and somehow magically expecting, that work was transpiring. But the problem was we as humans are often really bad at recognizing when it is time to shift our approach. And so as a result, they were working really hard at the things that they already were good at or the things that they already like to do, and they were neglecting to shift to other things that were important at that phase for them to be doing. So what I came to realize is that in most of our professional lives there's 4 key waves, and we have to get good at toggling between them. You were alluding to them briefly, but first there's learning, which I think of course makes sense to a lot of people as you're orienting to a new company or a new industry. But then we have to shift to creating, which is where we begin to contribute and share our ideas and make our value known. And then, of course, there's connecting, where you're meeting people, you're building relationships. Your ideas are only so so valuable if you're in a cave, right? You need other people to know what you think. So connecting is important. And then we get to reaping, and some people make the mistake of thinking, "Oh, well, I'm done now because things are going really well. I'm making good money. I'm respected in my field." But the problem is we can't be there forever. We have to learn how to disrupt ourselves at a certain point and shift back into learning mode so that we don't stagnate.
Yeah, you can't stay there forever. So, what would be some of the aspects of, of the, you know, of the connect mode? So, tell me a little bit more about that. So, you've learned about some topic, you've now created some content around it, or you created a company or a startup or a Broadway play. But tell me about the connect piece.
Yeah, absolutely. So, ultimately, relationships, as most people understand, are a really important part of what we're doing. When we think about long-term goals and long-term thinking, it's almost impossible, no matter what our goal is, to get there purely on our own. We need to have other people around us to help us or who can guide us, open us up so we even know what the possibilities are, to help us get better. So relationship building is a really crucial part of this. And some people shy away from it, either because it just doesn't come naturally to them, or maybe they have some kind of an ideology around, being a lone wolf that, no, I'm going to make it on my own. I'm going to make it on my own merits. But, frankly, it's just kind of short-sighted, because what it means is that you are limiting the data that you're exposing yourself to. So your ideas probably honestly are not as good as people who are working in concert with other people and being exposed to that cross pollination. And it also means that you're limiting the opportunity to amplify your ideas, even if they are fantastic, because it's just fewer people know about them.
Now, one thing that I liked in sort of a follow-on chapter, the right people, right rooms, is you talk about these dinners that you organize, and this relates to the connecting piece. And you talk about how when you moved to New York City, you didn't know a lot of people, so you decided to start organizing a series of intimate dinners to really build relationships, and talk about that a little bit, about how you structured those with your friend Elisa.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you have a little bit of an inside scoop on this, Will,
Well,
because
I think
you
we
were one of
met.
our
Yeah,
guests.
we met at one of
Yes.
these. I think I knew Elisa from a Renaissance weekend, and I think that's how I got to know you the first time.
That's exactly right. So, yes, what you're talking about is exactly right. I realized in moving to New York, which I did, 7 or 8 years ago, that I I had plenty of people that I could, sort of meet for like a professional coffee or something like that. But I realized, kind of to my alarm, that I didn't really have at that point any good friends in New York. I didn't have anybody I could hang out with or go to see something, see a show on a Friday or Saturday night or something like that. I realized I could either kvetch about it or actually do something. So the way that I chose to try to do something was to organize gatherings and events. Sometimes they were more tightly focused. Sometimes it was just for business authors. Sometimes it was kind of for a broader ecosystem of interesting people, kind of in the media or entrepreneurship or tech space, et cetera. And sometimes, to your point, I would co-host the event with a colleague, including our mutual friend Alyssa Cohn. And so, in doing that, it's a fantastic way to build connections, especially, frankly, if you're co-hosting, because you're really able to benefit from sharing networks. What I would often do with Alyssa is set it up so that I would invite four people, she would invite four people, and then our networks over time would get to know each other and build their own independent relationships. And it was amazing the connections that would happen. I have a colleague that I know who has a startup, and there was a guy that Alyssa invited to one of our dinners. They met, and he became an advisor on her board and helped her with fundraising as a result of this connection. So you can do great things for other people, but of course, it benefits your own personal and professional life as well.
Now, you have some, I think, helpful guidance on how to actually structure one of these, because it's one thing to just to get 8, 10 people together for a dinner, but if left unguided, they may just end up doing kind of chit chat about vacations or something. And you have a way of really helping to structure that conversation to get people to open up and to increase the likelihood that good connections will happen. Talk to me about how you kind of guide those the agenda, if you will, for those dinners.
Yeah, thank you, Will. I appreciate it. And it's true. I actually like to err on the side of being a little more aggressive rather than less when it comes to how to moderate the dinners. Because what I've come to realize, and this makes sense, if you are the guest, you're certainly not going to step up and say, oh, hey folks, here's how we should run this thing. I mean, that's not the role of a guest, and they would probably feel bad, or they would feel like they were overstepping. So they are going to be passive, but they're going to wait for you to do it. And so if you, as the host, do not step up, then there's often a little bit of a problem, because no one's taking the lead, and when nobody takes the lead, conversation usually devolves to the lowest common denominator. It's a bunch of people who don't really know each other sitting around saying, so, what are you watching on Netflix lately? Or, God forbid, talking about politics, or, just these kind of boring, banal things that are not really that satisfying for anybody. So instead, I'm really a believer that the host needs to take responsibility for the quality of the conversation. So I try to do a couple of things. The first one is I try to make sure that people feel comfortable going into it. And one of the ways that they can do that is I try to typically send out little bios of people beforehand if it's going to be a fairly intimate gathering. Because, if you're an introvert, for instance, you might like it or feel more comfortable if you know a little bit about the person. You can think about what you might want to talk to them about. You can look them up on LinkedIn and see if you know people in common, etc. So that's one thing that's helpful. And then another is at the dinner itself. Typically, I have two rounds of specific table questions. The first is just having people go around and introduce themselves so that everybody knows who's there. Talking a little bit about, who are you? What do you do for work? Tell us a little bit about yourself personally. And then typically we'll have another round with a table question where people respond to some prompt, just to get to know them a little bit more. And, there's no one right answer, but it could be anything from, what are you excited about this summer to, tell us about something that you did or learned during the pandemic that you want to keep up afterwards, or who is the biggest influence on your life and why, whatever it is, but it gives you a little bit of an additional window into who someone is.
What you've done a lot of these. I think you mentioned in the book you've done 60 plus of these. What have you learned about some of the very practical parts, like sending out invitations? You don't want to send out like 20 invitations, and have, everybody accept. But you also need to get people, enough people accepting and confirmed. So how do you manage that very practical piece of, let's say that you want to land at 4 people? How do you end up getting 4 guests and no more, no less?
Right, right. Well, the no more and no less part is always a little bit tricky, because one of the things that I've come to realize is that almost inevitably somebody is going to cancel last minute. It's kind of this rule of thumb, but my biggest take is that it's important to start the invitation process early. We can't do it too early. I mean, if it's 3 months out, nobody has any idea what they're going to be doing. But you want it to be early enough so that if somebody says no, then you have plenty of time to invite someone in their place, and it doesn't feel weird or awkward or last minute. So, if we're talking about, sort of like a New York City dinner party, inviting somebody a month in advance or 3 weeks in advance is probably a good move. And then, presuming that they're responsible and get back to you within a few days, there's lots of margin so that you can get the right number of people. Typically what will happen, if you're having, let's say, a 10-person dinner party, you have to have a little bit of room for things to go wrong. Your co-host gets overexcited and, invites an extra person. Okay, now we're at 11, and, and then, last minute, 2 people come down with COVID, or, whatever it is. So the numbers are a little bit of a moving target, but you can certainly get approximate, even if you can't get exact.
Any tips on locations, like any particular restaurants in New York City that you love, or doing this in a private space with maybe a chef or something, or talk to me about like locations.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, something that is always nice is if you can host it at your home and cook for people. That being said, that's hard to do. I literally tried to do it once in New York City, and I immediately gave up because I thought I was being so clever. I kept it small. It was 6 people, including myself, and I was already making everything vegetarian. And then suddenly, okay, somebody's vegan. Okay, I planned for that. And then last minute, somebody brings an extra friend who it happens is gluten free.
Oh,
And
oh God.
meanwhile, I had advertised it as a spaghetti party. I'm like, are you joking?
You can have some spaghetti sauce. Here you go.
Yeah, so I quickly realized that it was just too complex for me. But if someone is a little bit better in the kitchen, then that's certainly a nice way to do it. But that being said, in New York, the biggest problem is twofold. One is noise, and this is true in many large cities, but there's a lot of places where they just they're packing people in. I think a lot of restaurateurs somehow erroneously think that someplace will sound hip and festive if it's incredibly noisy. Whereas it's really just annoying. So you have to find a place that's chill enough that you can actually have a pleasant dinner. So it pays to scope it out if you can. The other, which it depends how you want to play it, right? You may want to be the host of this dinner and pay for it, in which case, no problem, anything is fine. But if you want to do it as a kind of people are going Dutch scenario, which for a long time I did, because I was having a lot of them. Like, it would have gotten incredibly expensive if I was paying for everybody. So the challenge is that a lot of restaurants will not accommodate separate checks for large groups. So I actually had my assistant at the time call 100, not joking, 100 restaurants in New York, and he came up with four that would be willing to do separate checks for a group of 8 or 10. And so I am happy to reveal them. They're both sort of local chains that have multiple outposts within New York. But one is Rosa Mexicano, which I love, and the other, which is also wonderful, is called Westville. So those are typically the places that I used. And the other consideration, which I think is helpful, is does the restaurant have a wide enough variety of food that presumably, you know, your average swath of America would like it reasonably well. You don't necessarily want it to be a super esoteric cuisine. You want people to have a lot of different choices. And also, particularly if you are going Dutch, you want it to be reasonably priced enough that it's not excluding people. If you're picking some place that's incredibly fancy and the entrees are $50, you are going to probably create an awkward situation if you're inviting anybody who is not already quite wealthy.
Right. Let's turn to another part of the book. You talk about strategic leverage, and one of the recommendations, one of the things you got to do is to stop doing some things, which sometimes is actually more powerful than adding new things. You can't really add new, investments of your time if you don't stop things. Talk to me about the things that you have stopped or that you've seen other people kind of just decide to stop doing and eliminate from their life to clear up space.
Yeah, this is a really important question, Will. And frankly, this is one of the most challenging things that we have to do because it's always easy, of course, to add on new things. It's exciting. Oh, it could be lucrative. We can get behind it. But stopping doing things is awkward. It's either awkward because we feel like we're letting somebody down, or it's awkward because we're a little bit afraid of the consequence. Oh, I could stop doing this, but that brings in money, and I might need that money. So we often hesitate to do it. But I'll give you an example from my own life. I have decided, as kind of a strategic direction for 2022, that I want to drastically reduce, probably not eliminate, but drastically reduce the amount of one-on-one coaching work that I do, because I think it's really important for me to free up my time to focus on scalable activities like creating online courses and better marketing the online courses that I already have. And I do run up against some serious time barriers. There's just not enough time given what I have to do in my schedule. So you have to make time somewhere. And one-on-one coaching, of course, is time consuming. So what I have done, and this is a very recent vintage, but I literally took coaching off my website. I don't have it up anymore as an option. Now, it's possible if somebody reaches out to me and they seem fantastic, then maybe I'll agree to do it. And certainly, I'm keeping up with my current clients until their contracts expire. But I am not advertising it. I'm not prioritizing it, so that I can reduce it and reallocate the time more strategically.
You also have a description in there about just saying no to requests, right? And how to do that in a graceful way, which is tough for us when people ask for, oh, could I have 20 minutes of your time to pick your brain or something?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you kind of feel a little bit like a villain when somebody sends you some heartfelt note about, oh, I love the this, I love the that, and it meant a lot, and would you be willing to hop on a call? And it's a little bit heart wrenching, which is actually partially why one of the activities that I'm in the process of operationalizing now is handing my inbox over, with procedures in place to my assistant, because he is far less likely to have his heart tugged at because these are not requests to him. So he can actually be a little bit more objective about whether the particular request fits into the parameters that we have set. But yeah, it's incredibly important, because one of the themes, Will, that I talk about in the long game is, for most professionals, and certainly it's true for high achieving, accomplished people like the Umbrex community is, it's not like we're wasting a huge amount of time as is. It's not like, oh yeah, you can get 10 hours a week back. Like, no, over the years, most people have gotten pretty efficient at things. It's not like there's massive pockets of time to discover. But where we really can excel is by just guarding the boundaries a little bit more aggressively. I really believe that this is a battle that is won at the edges. It's one of the edges of our inbox and our calendar. And so being smart enough to be able to reclaim an extra 30 or 60 or 90 minutes a week, which I do think is doable for most of us, actually can make an enormous difference.
Yeah, I mean, for someone like yourself, or any, a lot of the independent professionals listening to this show, we're not on a fixed salary, right? So your income is to some degree proportional to the time that you spend at it. So someone asking for half an hour of your time or something, it's equivalent to saying, "Oh, would you give me $500, or would you give me $1,000?" Just, I mean, no one would say that. Like, just walk up to you, "Hey, I love your stuff. Would you give me $1,000?"
Well, in New York, some of the panhandlers are pretty brazen,
Well, that's true, right? I don't get, but I
yes,
don't
for
get
sure.
emails like that. But you do get emails just saying, "Oh, would you, hop on a call with me? I'd love to ask you." So, I've been following an approach similar to what you recommend as much as I can. And we're at the boundary. If it's, I'm trying to create content that can scale, right? So if I've done a podcast on that topic before, I'll be like, here's a link to this podcast where I answered that question, and take a listen to that. And if it doesn't answer your question, then email me. So one area that I love is your topic of, and I haven't done this myself, which it's an interesting framework to think about, is your framework of heads up and heads down periods of time. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, this is something that I think is perhaps especially relevant as we are, fingers crossed and hopefully coming out of the pandemic, because for many people, the past couple of years really have been a kind of overwhelmingly heads down time. It's a time when many of us just felt like, oh my God, I just have to get things done. I've got this mountain of work. I've got all these responsibilities, and I just have to plow through and execute. And the truth is, sometimes life is like that. Sometimes we do need to do that, and that's the right move. But it's equally true that life shouldn't always be like that. It's kind of a bad idea, because if life is always like that, then not only is it kind of hard, sloggy work, but in addition to that, we often might make strategic mistakes because we are continuing to execute on a plan where circumstances might have changed. And so you periodically need to get smart about going into heads up mode, basically, as a way of, number one, getting re-inspired, but number two, even more importantly, making sure that the assumptions that you've been operating on and the goals that you're working toward are still, in fact, the right goals. So this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of our call, Will, that we need to get smart about understanding how to shift between different phases. We can't get away with just doing the same thing over and over again. We have to understand that we need to adapt as circumstances change.
And I didn't really tee it up, but let me see if I am kind of properly summarizing that framework. So the heads up mode is when you're looking out to the world. Maybe it's when you're marketing something that you've created. It's when you're looking for new ideas, looking for new opportunities. You're sort of exploring. And this heads down mode is when you try to the extent you can, close out the world so you can focus on creating or building something, maybe based on that research, where your heads up would be you're looking for new book ideas and researching. Heads down mode is you're closing yourself in the room to write the book for 3 months. Is that a fair way of summarizing that framework?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just like if you need an image, think about Punxsutawney Phil. Are you going back in your hole to do some more work, or are you keeping your head out and getting out of the hole to see what's up?
Now, You have a toolkit on your website that people can download. Let's just mention the URL for that. We'll include it in the show notes. And tell us a little bit about what we will get if we download that toolkit.
Yeah, thank you so much, Will. So it is true. There is a long game strategic thinking self-assessment, and folks who are interested in these questions can get it for free at dorieclark.com/the long game. And basically, this is just a series of guided questions that you can work through in a workbook. You can, it's one of these PDFs that you can actually type into yourself and then save and keep your answers. But it really aims at helping you apply these principles to yourself. How to really take some of the frameworks we talk about in the book about long-term thinking and becoming a better strategic thinker, and helps you turn the lens on yourself and your own career. So I hope it might be helpful to folks.
Fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about your consulting practice. So, from your books, which I've read all four of your books, I have a pretty good sense of kind of your outward facing content creation. You have a lot of great stuff about how to get recognized for your expertise and how to monetize it. I don't know as much about your sort of private consulting practice. Tell us a little bit about the types of clients you serve and what sorts of issues you help them address.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, a lot of the work that I do, I'm a big believer. This is actually one of the topics of my book, Entrepreneurial You. But I'm a big believer in creating multiple revenue streams. So I have a fairly diversified business. That is one of my favorite ways to de-risk for the future. But a piece of what I do is giving corporate keynote talks. So I'll do that for corporations. I also do a lot in the online course space for entities like LinkedIn Learning or Udemy or Skillsoft, and then I also run my own online courses, including my big program, which is called Recognized Expert. And as we talked about, I do some coaching, although I'm de-emphasizing that. It's one-on-one coaching, and so that is either with corporate executives who are largely focused on their communication. So, how do you become a better communicator, both externally with different stakeholders and within your organization, sort of more effective at conveying your vision, and or with entrepreneurs or self-employed folks like consultants or executive coaches to really focus on platform building and helping them become thought leaders in their field. It's primarily what I do. And then I also run a mastermind called the Trajectory Mastermind, which is a year-long program for mid six-figure, typically self-employed professional service providers who are looking to grow their platform and their profile and hopefully hit seven figures.
What do you know now about creating online courses that you wish you knew when you started?
Well, I think that I I don't necessarily regret the process because I feel like in a lot of cases you have to hunt around and just try a bunch of things to see what works. But certainly early on, I experimented with a lot of different styles and a lot of different providers, and not all of them worked out. I mean, just as one example, there was a course that I did that was actually sponsored by the kind of the online learning arm of I'll call it sort of a platinum media brand. And I thought, oh, that's cool. It'd be cool to be affiliated with them. So I did this course with them, and it was interesting. It was not a super long course, so it didn't take me a huge amount of time to create. So I'm not terribly bitter, but over a period of 7 or 8 years, I mean, oh my gosh, I don't even know if I made a few $1,000s from it. Like it was not, it just did not bring in much money. And in fact, I got an email from them a few weeks ago saying that this company was planning to disband their online learning arm, so it is no longer a thing. So even for things that you feel like, oh wow, this would be great to do, it doesn't always work out. I have plenty of colleagues who have signed on with other sort of nascent platforms and really hasn't gone anywhere. But that being said, some of the online courses that I have created myself or have partnered with other ones have become just astoundingly lucrative. So I actually think it really is oftentimes a question of needing to try a bunch of things, but then just doubling down your efforts on the things that are working.
Yeah, and what are some of the things that you've found? So I've taken a few online courses, and they vary on a few dimensions. Like some of them, there'll be interactivity where you have you can expected to post, and someone will perhaps respond, and there's some synchronous element to it. Sometimes they'll have exercises you could do. Sometimes it's just simply a set of 8 lectures, and you watch or 40 short videos or something. What have you found in terms of like format, in terms of level of interactivity or level of community, or like the exercises? So for somebody that's listening that has some content that they that someone would find valuable to learn, what are your tips on getting started creating an online course?
Well, I think that certainly one element that I've learned from running my own course, the Recognized Expert Community, over the past 6 years is there's sort of a saying or a truism in online course creation circles, which I think is 100% true, which is that they come for the course, but they stay for the community. And what we mean by that is that it's a very hard like sales proposition. Most people are not going to be like, yeah, I'm going to pay you X thousands of dollars, to join some community, like whatever. Like we all think, that sounds weird. That sounds lame. Why would we do that? But actually, this is one of the elements where the full value of it is really hard to convey unless the people have experienced it. So what they think they're signing up for is the course material, but what makes it sticky and powerful is the relationships they build with other folks who are involved in the process. So the more that you are able to connect them with colleagues and help them build relationships, the better it is. Because it really not only inspires them to go deeper in the material and kind of make it more a part of their lives, but you're really able to positively transform them by helping to fill their social circle with other like-minded people that are interested in the same things that they are. So that's been a very powerful lesson for me. But going back to kind of the original premise of your question, Will, I think that the truth is there are a lot more people who actually have the knowledge and expertise to be able to teach probably quite high quality courses. There's a lot more of them than there are people who can sell the courses. And so I think that probably what's most important here is for folks to make sure that before they go too far down the garden path of course creation, which can be quite time consuming, that they have a really detailed plan, at least, for how and to whom they are going to sell that course. Because the last thing you want to do is to create a course and then just like, oh, I hope somebody buys it, because that's usually not a winning strategy. You either want to have already figured out your distribution strategy, whether that's, your client has volunteered to buy 100 seats or 500 seats, or maybe you already have a great email list of B2C consumers. Great, that would be fantastic. Or maybe you have made an arrangement to do it with a company that already has their own base of users, like a LinkedIn Learning or something like that. In which case, you don't really have to worry about the marketing because they have built-in marketing for that. But what you don't want to do is spend a lot of time creating a course and then not have a clear plan of who you're going to sell it to.
So would you recommend if unless you're going to do something where it's LinkedIn Learning where they are going to market it on your behalf, if you're going to do it on your own, would you recommend first making sure that you've built up a reputation as an expert, that you have a set of followers, that you have an email list with with a certain X number of subscribers who might sign up for your course?
Generally, yes. I mean, the exception to that is if you are a consultant that has a significant B2B practice. As they say, wholesale is always easier than retail, right? So if you've been consulting for whatever, Bank of America or whatever company for years, they trust you, they love you, you can often cook something up with a client that you have a good relationship with, and you can say, oh, hey, I've been thinking about creating an online course, on such and such topic. Do you think your people would be interested in that? And if they say yes, you could offer to give them a really discounted rate to be your beta testers. And you can essentially create the course, be paid to create the course with them, and then just make sure that you retain the right to sell it later. And that can be fantastic because you already have X number of people who are testing it, giving you feedback, and perhaps building up a constituency within that company. Maybe you sell 100 seats, but if other people like it and it goes a little bit viral, maybe you can continue to sell seats even just within that company. So there's a lot of ways to approach it.
Let's talk about long-term goals for a moment. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 year goals, but 10, 20, 30-year types of goals. Share some of yours and or some of the ones that people that you've talked about and gotten feedback from your book about. In the book, you talk about that you want to get a show on Broadway as one of your 10-year goals. Talk about some of the other things that you have on your long-term agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think is really interesting and kind of liberating is that a lot of people sometimes hesitate to lay out or express longer term goals because they feel sort of embarrassed or stymied that they don't know what to do or they don't know how to achieve them. They feel like they can't necessarily name a goal until they know how they're going to do it. But the truth is, for an especially long term goal, you don't have to. You don't have to know how to achieve it. I mean, it would almost be hubristic to imagine that, if we're talking about something that's a 20-year goal, that now exactly how it's going to play out over the next 20 years. I mean, the world could be a super different place 20 years from now. So I think realistically, all you need is that vision and then at least a sense of just what do you do in the short term? What does it look like? What's the next step? What's the step tomorrow? And you keep taking those steps. But for me personally, one of the big goals that I've been pursuing and working on over the past now 6 years is to become really good at writing musical theater and to write a show that hopefully ends up on Broadway. And so I have a musical theater collaborator. I do called book and music, or sorry, the book and lyrics, and she does the music. She's a composer, and we are partnering together on a couple of different shows that we're working on. So we're really working hard to try to move the ball forward.
I love that. I love that. There's really by setting long-term goals, you can make investments that just wouldn't make sense for if your horizon is 5 years, right? You can make investments in relationships that have no likely benefit to you in 5 years if you're only thinking short term. But if you're thinking long term or infinite kind of game, then it just opens up types of investments that can have a high ROI, but not necessarily short-term returns. So I really love the whole book that you have, The Long Game. Dorie, where would you point people online if they want to learn more about your work?
Will, thank you. I really appreciate it. Well, my website is dorieclark.com. It's got all the details, and I'll just remind people that they can get the long game strategic thinking self-assessment at dorieclark.com/the long game. I really appreciate the chance to speak with you.
Dorie, it has been such a pleasure, educational. We'll include those links in the show notes. And thank you so much for the discussion today.
Thank you.